our thesis is, in a world of agent-to-agent interactions, the things that become most useful are task-specific agents as well as user-specific agents. And the only way to actually train those is on user-owned and verified IP. And that's what we really envision Camp Network being.
None of the information in this podcast constitutes investment advice or an offer, recommendation, or solicitation by WAGMI Ventures or any of its affiliates to buy or sell any securities. Hey WAGMI family, Benga here with another WAGMI Ventures podcast episode. Today I'm chatting with Nirav Murthy. He's the CEO and co-founder of Camp Network, a layer 1 blockchain built to modernize intellectual property infrastructure and power the next generation of AI agents on verifiable IP. For anyone who is new, this is the WAGMI Ventures podcast, where we do snapshots with interesting builders and founders across crypto and AI. Check out wagmiventures.io to learn more about the syndicate behind the podcast. All right, let's kick things off with Nirav. What's up, bro? Welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, folks. Huge fans of WAGMI Ventures, and investor in us as well, in full disclosure, but really excited to be here today.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Your journey from finance at the Rhine Group to co-founding Camp Network is fascinating. How did your experience in investment banking and growth equity shape your vision for solving blockchain scalability challenges?
Yeah, such a good question. So quick background on me, went to school on the West Coast at Berkeley and then went straight into finance at a combination of investment banking and growth equity at the Rhine Group. As you mentioned, the Rhine Group specifically works across gaming, sports, entertainment, media, and music. You know, as a product of being a West Coast college kid, I'd always been pretty interested in the idea of crypto. Was a retail investor in Ethereum, got into the whole ICO bubble for a little bit. But at the time when I was at Rhine, in 2021, DeFi Summer, the original one, you saw a lot of folks basically see, holy cow, what's going on with crypto? Things are pumping. And we saw a lot of gains in particular. And a lot of my clients, to say the very least, along with sort of the studios and media folks, really get interested in this idea of, okay, what all can we do around whether it was NFTs or tokens or anything community oriented to help bolster our existing brand and decrease customer acquisition costs while simultaneously increasing retention. That was the first thing that got me really interested. And what got me really interested in IP on that side was around the time was the Writers Guild of America strike with Hollywood, effectively, where people were mad that AI was being used for script writing and whatnot. And I was like, wow, there's clearly something going on over here. Agents are becoming more and more popular. And it's very difficult to prove who's the actual IP creator behind something or where provenance really exists. And that's what led to the modern generation of Camp Network. Originally, what we were doing was building a creator economy platform on chain similar to Patreon, all for this idea of 90% of revenue is driven by 10% of fans. And how do we really nail that provable fandom? But over time, what we quickly realized is in order to build this competitively, you need a few things. And provenance was one of them. And the only way to have real provenance is by having your own block space, which is ultimately why we decided to build our own layer 1 blockchain that has become Camp Network today.
Wow. I love how you tie all the pieces of like your experience, both personal and professional, into building Camp Network. So in your words, tell us, what is Camp Network and what does it aim to accomplish?
Yeah, Camp Network we call is the autonomous IP layer. The goal is simple. Its users can register and tokenize their IP, fine-tune and deploy agents around this, and then enable broader community usage of those agents, all while handling the payment distributions. Our thesis is pretty simple. In the future, 95% plus of all IP generated will be done through AI. And so provenance, or proving that you're the creator behind something, matters more and more than ever before, as it really did. The second thing that we're really seeing is the future of the world will be driven by agent-to-agent interactions. In a world where this exists, there's not really as much interest for gen-purpose agents. You've already seen this with GPT, like Anthropic, even like Gemini to some degree. But that market is a little bit dead. And so our thesis is, in a world of agent-to-agent interactions, the things that become most useful are task-specific agents as well as user-specific agents. And the only way to actually train those is on user-owned and verified IP. And that's what we really envision Camp Network being. We view it as the largest user-owned IP repository in the world, which also functions as the largest data sampling marketplace. And we think there's real value over there. The demand for user-owned IP has never been more important than ever before, and that's what we get really excited about today.
Awesome. You guys just had a blockbuster $25 million Series A round led by the best of the best. 1KX, Blockchain Capital. I guess you guys were valued at like $400 million. That's quite a fit. Like, how are you guys planning to leverage this funding to tackle intellectual property issues and challenges posed by AI? And I'm just thinking particularly given the lawsuits against companies like OpenAI.
Yeah, really good question. And I think what you hit on the head, I'll address the latter part of what you mentioned first, and then I'll go into the former. But you mentioned something super poignant, which is there's a lot of lawsuits against OpenAI. Why is that? It's like OpenAI was basically scraping the world's internet and then taking other people's data effectively and training their agents on it. We've seen a lot of these modeling companies effectively do that over time, and then ultimately they have to pay Reddit a large sum of money. The key point there is Reddit got the sums of money, but why does Reddit have any value in the first place? It's because of the users who are actually contributing to the network. And unfortunately, none of those users actually saw any of the dollars that GPT or OpenAI ultimately settled with when it came to Reddit. And that's one of the reasons why we're building Camp. In a world where users are the one creating data that people are training on, they should be the ones who are compensated for all of this, as opposed to just these like tech entities at the end of the day. In terms of why we raise the money, obviously we're doing a lot of interesting stuff on the scaling side. Building a blockchain is expensive, as I'm sure you're familiar with. It's not just the labor costs, it's a lot of technology costs, a lot as part of hosting that, whether it's RPC, block scouts, indexers, and all that type of stuff. That's one thing. The second is we're looking to scale this as a really big business longer term. We view this almost as longer term becoming the greatest data sampling marketplace, whether that's eBay for data or however you want to phrase it. That's something really unique that we can do here while enabling those users to get paid. And so a lot of this will go towards scaling, gearing up for a large mainnet at some point. And then we're also doing a lot of incubations ourselves. One of the things we think about is you look at a lot of these Web2 parties in general, people are starting to feel more sensitive about their data, privacy, and security in the first place. And one of the things that we think blockchain represents really interesting, there's two sort of unique aspects of it and really big use cases. Number one is microtransactions. Everything being done through the chain gets substantially easier over time. And that's why we use blockchain. And I think the second is a large part of this is the self-sovereignty of IP. That's no longer relying on Google, who could basically go leak it, and you have a Cambridge Analytica scandal all over again as it relates to Facebook. This is all user-owned and user-verified in the first place, which is what we get really excited by.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And the way you guys approach it, how does it differ from competitors like Sony or PIP Labs or like a Zero Gravity and some of the other L1 chains out there?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think the best comp, as you mentioned, is PIP Labs, which obviously Story Protocol is like the best example of somebody who's doing this in a really effective way. And we love the Story guys. They've done an awesome job of educating people on the necessity for IP management on chain. I think the approach to which we take it is a little bit too different. It is a little twofold different. And I won't really delve into the technical details over here because we'll talk a little bit about the DevX. But the first thing is our belief is that tokens have two really good values. One is capital formation and the second is community incentives. And insofar as that's true, the approach that we take is we're going after this whole user-owned IP aspect. Now, what does that really mean, user-owned? Does that mean like photos, music, images, videos? Sure, it means all of that, but it also means data. Literally everything you do is your own IP. If you and I were to go get dinner together and then take a photo and then I were to write a review about it, that fundamentally is my IP. And so the go-to-market strategy that we're really focused on is the long tail of user-owned IP in the first place. And then using that to really fine-tune and deploy these agents. And obviously, we've built our own developer SDK that makes it the easiest way to register IP on chain, as well as we have our own AI framework called Matrix that enables you to fine-tune and deploy these agents based off of your own IP in the first place. We saw a lot of problems with these other AI frameworks in terms of the pain and the annoyingly difficult process it is to actually train these models and then also point to it from a framework perspective. So that's one of the reasons why we built this all in-house in the first place. Story obviously raised a ton of money, and so they're going after almost this Web2 IP on chain in the first place. They're doing a lot on the music side of things, buying catalogs and whatnot. Candidly, we don't have the balance sheet to do that. And from our days when we were building with the Patreon on chain, the creator economy style, we got to know a lot of the artists and managing companies and agencies. And ultimately what we found is it's a very long sales cycle process, and it tends to be pay to play. Our belief is let's go after this long tail, get these initial sort of set of users on board, prove that it works, then go after the Web2 side of things. And candidly, we're seeing this process happen in pretty real time. We're starting to have a lot more conversations with the Web2 IP houses as well, but knowing that those things will only come online, call it next year, about a year and a half from now. I think the other thing to note is from a developer perspective, I think we've built one of the most unique ecosystems in blockchain. Most of the time, these ecosystems are largely DeFi heavy, with 50% plus of the dApps being all some sort of iteration of perps, lending, or DEXs overall. In our Camp native ecosystem, which is extremely robust today, we're 60 plus native teams exclusive to Camp. I would say about 75% are what I call an entertainment, social, or consumer, which is really interesting because it's not only are we helping users onboard their Web2 IP on chain, these guys are also creating new data and new IP on chain in the first place, which is what we get even more excited by. So that's the second thing of that. And then I think the third thing is from a developer ecosystem, something that really resonates with teams is you look at the way that blocks are determined from validators. 99% of the time, they're going to prioritize what has the highest MEV, which is always going to be DeFi related. And so the result of that is if you're a consumer developer or IP or AI, which broadly falls under the umbrella of consumer crypto, it's a bad experience for your users because they experience really high latency. And I think we can all relate to this when you click something and, it takes 30 seconds or 45 seconds and then nothing happens or the transaction fails and you're like, what did I just waste my life on? And then you X out of it. We have taken that different at the execution layer where we prioritize all transactions related to IP and AI. And I think that really matters because from a DevX perspective, if you're building in that consumer crypto umbrella and you're talking to a chain where they're actually prioritizing that, it makes a significantly better experience, not only for you, but also for your users long-term, which leads to better retention, which is something that candidly every blockchain app struggles with today.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that comparison there between the folks and your approach and just doubling down a little bit, and maybe you've covered this, but your focus is on modular data availability for rollups. And if you wanted to break it down for a non-technical listener, like this approach, why is it game-changing for developers building consumer apps in culture, music, or gaming?
Yeah, really good question. And let me just clarify on the one thing you mentioned. One of the things that we've done is with our good friends over at Gelato, the RAS provider, any dApp that gets big enough on what we call like Basecamp, which is our L1, they can actually spin up a sidecamp, which is effectively similar to a side chain or an app chain. And the reason why we do that is we spend a lot of time talking to our teams. From our investment banking backgrounds, one of the things that we know really hard is listen to your customers and listen to your clients. And the biggest thing that app developers, particularly in the segments that you mentioned, entertainment, music, and social, struggle with today is like really high latency experience for their users. Why that sucks is because you look at what these folks are traditionally used to. It's like Netflix, Spotify, YouTube, Apple TV or Disney Plus in there, Facebook, Instagram. Those are probably the best apps that have ever existed in Web 2. And so when people are trying to do one of those like Web 2 apps in Web 3, and it's a pretty poor experience because it takes forever to do something, it really sucks. Like it's a really bad experience. So everybody's like, why would I ever use this when I can use Instagram? The $10 that I make via an airdrop isn't actually going to change anything. This is not interesting to me. The other thing to note is those are the types of apps that can actually bring in millions of users. Not like the same 50K to 150K farmers who are basically just camping for, no pun intended, but like basically hanging around for an airdrop. It's much more about people who actually want to use an app and stay in it because there's something that's pretty interesting. And so the reason why we basically built this the way that it is the only way that you can really decrease your latency on the user side of things is by having your own execution environment or your own block space. And that's one of the reasons why we basically did this, where it's, look, we have a team like Rewarded TV that has 1.4 million monthly active users in Web 2. If they come on chain, they're coming on chain, and if we get all 100% of those users, which I'm not delusional, we'll get a percentage of those from day one. But it's going to suck for them if they're going to have to wait behind every single thing attached to it. So they already have scale. Why shouldn't they have their own block space? The other thing that this enables us to do is give them their own app-specific sequencing. And why that really matters is then they feel like the infrastructure layer isn't just taking all of their fees. They're accruing their own value the same way that any big app should accrue their own value as well. Because historically, if you look at it, if you're an app that launches on top of a chain, what ends up happening is the value accretion goes completely to the infrastructure layer or the actual L1 or the L2 in the case of L2s. And that's why we wanted to really distribute some of the love with the applications building on top of us as well.
Hey everybody, quick thing here. We're excited to announce WAGMI Advisory, your home for all things fundraising, hiring, and partnerships. This is all about supercharging your project with the WAGMI network, consisting of over 20,000 executives, investors, and builders in crypto, all ready to come alongside your project to help it succeed. Get in touch at team@wagmiventures.io to learn more and figure out if WAGMI Advisory is the right fit for your project. Let's get back to the show. Yeah, no, I can imagine how that's really beneficial for the growth of the community and retention. I think in a recent podcast, you mentioned the importance of organic community growth for Camp Network. I think a lot of projects struggle with user retention. You talked about sharing the love. I guess maybe that's one strategy that you're using to keep users engaged. Are there any other unconventional strategies that you guys are deploying to keep your users engaged long-term?
I'll almost answer this in two parts. I think when you think about community, there's sort of two lenses that you need to look from. The first is your developer community, which is the applications. And then the second is your actual like user community or again, that, which is the more traditional sense of the word community. On the developer side of things, look, the 2022 and 2023 metas were defined by like, hey, here's 250K, you should build on top of us. But the result is if an app is negotiating that hard for some of these fees, then they're probably doing it with 10 other chains as well. And so you're sort of bouncing around and not investing all in one. The result of that is really fragmented user liquidity. So clearly just paying for apps, I'm putting on air quotes, doesn't really work at scale. And so that's why we get pretty excited by the really robust native ecosystem that we built today, because it's largely people who actually want to build with us. I know that sounds crazy to think about. I think there's a combination of things that you can do to keep developers really happy. Number one is, it sounds really weird and like obvious, but you just have to show up and make sure that you're interested in what they're building, and make sure to always show up whenever they need anything, whether that's intros to potential dev tooling partners, whether that's intro to wallet providers, whether that's intros to potential future clients, whether that's intros to other teams that can have synergies. That's the most important thing in terms of working with your teams to make sure that they feel the love, as I mentioned earlier. I think the second thing is, a lot of teams, particularly on the app side, have historically struggled to raise because a lot of the dollars in crypto from venture pours into infrastructure projects. And so if you can sit with them and say, here's a narrative that we think would work on the fundraising side, as well as actually introducing them to investors versus just saying, oh, here's some guy's Telegram, like you should DM them, or here are some folks you should talk to. That makes a massive difference because people really feel like they're part of this broader ecosystem that's growing. That's the most important thing. That's on the developer side of things. On the consumer side of things, I think the biggest thing is you really have to lean into what you guys are good at or what you guys want to be. Let me explain what I mean by that. In blockchain, people tend to like mid-curve things a lot, where they're like brain rotty, but then also like big brain things. And the result is that they're just like stuck in the middle or like community purgatory. And that's not the way it works. You, number one, need to build a really organic community, which just takes time. You can't just like tell people we're airdropping 20% of the tokens, and then once you launch your token and everybody dumps it, there's no community anymore. That's literally not how it works. They're just trying to buy users. That's like, here's $100 referral fee to like it on Twitter. And then after you dump the $100, nobody's ever going to interact with it again. That's why you see so many projects with such high follower counts, but literally nobody actually engaging on the accounts, on like the tweets or posts in general. So number one is it takes time and you have to do it slowly. Number two is to lean into your branding pretty hard. Historically, we've been like pretty brain rotty. We're building an IP. We kind of have to be like more of a vibes chain if you think about it, and cultural in that lens. So we've always tried to do memes around that. We've always tried to do really creative partnership announcements as opposed to just logo X logo. Try and tap into some of the existing mindshare and brain rot that's really worked. And I think the third is get them involved. Like, I know that sounds really dumb, but get them involved in any way, shape, or form. Have them QA test. Have them be community mods. Have them be like actively involved in the building process. Take feedback from them on where things are lacking or where they're hearing other people, other aspects of the chain lacking as well. Not just on the tech side, but on the community side. Somebody's saying in the Discord, we actually like, one of the reasons why we built this developer SDK specifically to register IP and set terms and conditions is company said it would be really cool if we could do this at the application level as opposed to having to do it as something on top that we have to go to. That's a phenomenal idea. We're UX maxis. Everything should be done in the minimal amount of clicks possible. And so listening to your community is a really good way to grow community longer term as well.
Yeah, it sounds really basic to just take care of your community, listen to them. But I want to take a step back here and look at it from a different view. You've talked about how you've been able to engage them and keep them with the basics and, of course, the strategies that you've built in increasing adoption. I want to look at like where things are today. Crypto markets seeing renewed interest, coins hitting all new highs. There's more reg clarity coming down. How do you see these macro trends influencing Camp Network's adoption?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So number one, I'll caveat this by saying if you're ever trying to time the market for your chain, you're already at a loss. Like, it just doesn't work. The reason for that is because you mentioned like crypto is a pretty volatile asset. And so, you know, if you're like, oh, January's hot, let's go in January, and something happens in February, then you never really know. So trying to time the market and building for timing the market is a completely worthless endeavor, in my candid opinion. That's the first thing. Number two is we think we're going to have a real adoption, like because of the applications layer that we built. If we believe the form factor by which users will come onto blockchain will be the application layer. Currently and historically, what we've seen is people come on board to like farm airdrops for layer ones. If that continues to be the case, it screws as an industry. And what I mean by that is like nobody ever takes a photo and then uploads it to like their AWS or something else. They upload it on Instagram, which then gets stored into their infrastructure layer over time. That's through the app layer. That's where we really believe it will happen. And we believe we have one of the best app layers in crypto, which is candidly why we think we're going to have adoption either way. In terms of the macro, like you hit it on the head, Bitcoin's pumping pretty hard, like ETH's having a comeback as well, which usually trickles down into the alt seasons. I think we're starting to see three big things in crypto. Number one is like an unprecedented level of institutional interest. And I think that's largely because of slightly more clarity when it comes to regulation around tokens overall. So that's like good to see. We should see that pour into everything else. Number two is a decent amount of consolidation. I think there's been more M&A this year in blockchain than there has all of last year already, which I think is a sign that people are starting to basically combine, as opposed to trying to be these like, ghost chains or ghost apps or ghost something, basically be a part of something bigger and actually vertically integrate and try and compete on everybody else. And the third, and where I think we play the most in and why it's most important for us, is what I call like purpose-built block space. I think gone are the days of these like general purpose L1s or L2s, where just come here and build anything you want. Now we're starting to see things come up as really specifically built for something. With the case of us and Story, that's all things IP. With the case of like Bera, you're seeing a lot of DeFi because of POL. With the case of Plume, you're seeing RWA. And I think a lot of these teams are basically going to own their space pretty hard, and there'll be 2 or 3 at the top. But a lot of these L1s that are now building general purpose, I mean, Solana and Sui have already got and Ethereum obviously, have already got so much scale that it's very difficult to try and launch a gen purpose L1 at this point.
Brilliant. On that same theme there, but more on partnerships, you've collaborated with EigenDA, you've joined the Superchain. How's this partnership evolved in 2025? If you could also elaborate around what new use cases you're exploring to bring to Web2 social data, that would be interesting to hear as well.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, when we were building our block space originally in 2024, we were actually layer 2. And that's when we were partnering with the Superchain and EigenDA as part of like OP plus Eigen as all DA, and then OP was the stack. Starting Q3, we obviously decentralized to become a layer 1 and actually hit our test net last Thursday. But that was a 9-month endeavor to become a layer 1, no longer partnered with Superchain or EigenDA. On the Web 2, the reason why we decentralized from the L2 to the L1, as I mentioned earlier, is the necessity to customize the execution layer, as well as then giving teams the opportunity to have their own side chains and app chains. So that's really why we've like become a layer 1. So obviously those 2 partnerships are no longer the most relevant. In terms of the Web 2 side of things, I mean, look, we're doing a ton. We have a ton of teams that are doing pretty interesting stuff on the Web 2 IP side. We have a ton of artists that are coming out that will be working with us. A few IP creators who are actually going to be launching comics on chain based off their IP in Web 2 with the combination of our teams plus their existing IP. So we have a number of these teams where they do IP generation via AI. We have a team like Merv that does that. We have a team that's Story Chain that enables you to write books in any of your favorite author's style. We have a team called Hume that does a lot on the AI music side, where it's like create music around, or like an AI record label, where basically you pick an artist who you really like, and then it makes music like that as well. So we're seeing a lot of the really excited stuff come on that piece of the lens. And then in addition, we're already seeing a lot of really cool brands come on board as well. So we'll be announcing a couple of these partnerships in the first couple of weeks of June, but really looking forward to people going to be watching these. And on top of that, a lot more direct Web 2 partnerships will be building on chain as well, both on the sports side of things related to IP, as well as on the media side of things related to entertainment.
Yeah, no, that's all really exciting for sure. If Camp Network achieves its vision of becoming the go-to infra for modular blockchain apps, just following on your last comment there, what's one consumer app, maybe in music, gaming, social media, that you dream of seeing built on the platform?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have a pretty robust ecosystem that has a lot of my dream apps. We have a decentralized streaming team called Hitmaker. One of my favorite teams for actually like video is called Rewarded TV, as I mentioned earlier. But these guys are taking things to the next level. You look at like a business like Tubi, where it's watch to earn and you're not paying, Tubi's like an advertising video on demand platform. They don't pay any of the IP rights. They basically split the ad revenue. And Rewarded TV is doing that, but also really handing it out to like the users on top. So now it's almost like a watch to earn platform. And then owning that data is infinitesimally valuable because everybody's trying to see where people are spending their time online. And then the next step of this is they're going to start producing their own IP, whether that's documentaries or fiction. And on top of that, what they're doing is using tokens as a yield to crowdfund that, as opposed to trying to go to JP Morgan and get like a 20% loan. That seems a really cool use case of tokens where it's like, hey, what can we do with tokens that we couldn't do previously in Web 2? And an obvious answer for that is capital formation at a cheaper cost than whatever predatory loan that a financing firm is going to associate with you on that. On the gaming side, we're seeing a ton of things. I think what I get really excited by is long-term, I want to see almost like a mini clip series where there's a whole host of different games and you earn in-apps for basically succeeding, similar to like the traditional gaming stuff that you've seen with Candy Crush or like Balloons or any of these, where you earn rewards and can spend them on either new birds like in Angry Birds or like new NFTs and whatnot. I think a really strong gaming ecosystem is something that we're building out right now as well. And then I think the third is really democratizing access. I hate that term democratizing, but we're making it really easy for people to use AI to create new IP in the first place. Like Sora's proven like what the world of AGI for video could look like. But imagine you take that a step further and you have one for music. Now, obviously you have things like Suno, which is like AI like music for sounds and whatnot. But imagine trying to produce your music on the traditional Ableton or DAW side of things. They're pretty intimidating. Nobody really knows how to use them. So if you have like a cursor for those, that's one of the teams that's actually being built on camp right now as well today. And then lastly is there's been a lot of attempts at fan engagement. We haven't seen any of them work at scale yet. I think it's a combination of not many people are familiar enough with the industry. And also there's not enough thoughts or actual like data points to prove what really works. But we're seeing a couple of teams start to get scale on that as well that we're pretty excited about.
That's fantastic. All right, man. One more question here around what in the broader Web3 landscape, whether it's a trend or a tech that is not in your immediate focus that you're excited about, or I should say not in Camp Network's immediate focus that you're excited about.
The bitter reality of blockchain is everything is in our focus, right? Like I can talk about ZK and how we're using ZK-TLS basically to help users verify it's their data from Web2 sources. I could talk about Paralyze and talk about how better performance L1s are better for us long-term as well. I think the big thing to note, what I'm pretty excited by tech trends is almost the lack of tech trends, which is we're starting to see teams actually focus on like adoption, traction, BD, and sales and partnerships, as opposed to just trying to big brain tech that candidly it creates a lot of solutions to problems that we don't really have today. So I'll almost flip it on you and give you the contrapositive, which is my favorite tech trend is the lack of tech going on right now or tech innovation right now, and the sudden focus on adoption as well. Because in my 2 years of working in this industry, we probably have a few more users than we had 2 years ago, but you don't see people in the street using these new applications or new blockchains for anything outside of just stable coins, holding, trading, or gambling, which is the exact same thing that we saw 2 years ago. Sure, stable coins have become much more prevalent, especially in some of these high inflation countries. But beyond that, adoption really has not grown at all, especially when you compare it to like the other high growth industry like AI, where GPT's gone from 9 months to 100 million subscribers. I think that proves what PMF could look like. And that's what I'm hoping for on the blockchain side of things as well.
Fantastic. It was absolute pleasure having you on. You have lots that we all learned here today, and absolutely cheering for you and the project. It's definitely going to be a game changer. And we'll look forward to having you back on the show soon.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate the time.
Cheers.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, go ahead and give us a good 5-star rating and subscribe wherever you're getting your podcasts so you can get all the latest conversations from the most interesting founders, builders, and investors from across the world. Thanks so much and have a good one.